Just wanted to introduce Guy Ryder. So Geneva talked again about the kind of the why, how, and what of the Yurok tribe's adoption of the Rights of the Klamath River Resolution. So to introduce Guy Ryder, Guy is a traditional Menominee who resides on the Menominee Reservation. He's the executive director of a Menominee Indian community organization, and he's a member of the Menominee Constitutional Task Force. And Guy led the effort to adopt a resolution recognizing the rights of the Menominee River. So with that, I turn it over to Guy.
Yeah, so. Anakwitnitakam, Wapasha Nitotang, Kashitnitsky Wakin, Wawana Nitskis Mawani Natanaway Makanuk, Ayo Saitua. I said my name is Guy Ryder. I also introduced myself in our beautiful sacred Menominee language of introducing my clan and where I come from. I live here on the Menominee Indian Reservation, which is located here in Wisconsin. We're about 40 miles, I would say, northwest of Green Bay, Wisconsin. We're the longest living inhabitants of this area. We've been on this current reservation now since 1862, but our oral history states that our creation story starts at the mouth of the Menominee River. I wanted to just give you a little bit of that background before I kind of talked about how I got into our why this rights of nature was done on my end. It actually started, I was at a conference for a traditional ecological knowledge conference, and I was presenting there, and I actually was able to catch a presentation by a lady by the name of Mari Margel, who was talking about rights of nature. And when I watched the presentation, it was something that I already knew. I was very familiar with it. A lot of our culture, a lot of our traditions speak of having and respecting those rights that our animals and plants and trees have. So I talked to her after that, and we kind of exchanged information, and I always kind of had that in my mind as I got back home here onto the reservation. We started to fight against a sulfide mine they were trying to put in on the Menominee River. And like I said earlier, that's the birthplace of where we are, where we come from as Menominee people. And, early on there was a lot of strategy sessions being had and a lot of ways to think about what we could do. But I always had that rights of nature in the back of my mind, and as we kind of progressed in that fight and went down many avenues and did many things, anybody that's been in environmental fights like that, you obviously understand and realize that it seems that you're always reactive, and boy, you got to have tough skin to be a environmentalist these days, and it was getting a lot like that, and it seemed like we were always reacting all the time. And I keep thinking of, like, how can we get proactive, or how can we do something that would be more of a proactive approach. So I thought again of rights of nature. Started to talk to some of our councilmen on that, especially our chairman at the time, who was very much involved. His name was Gary Besaw. That chairman at that time was very open to the idea and wanted to do many things. Not that the other ones haven't since then, but him and I really kicked it off there, and I got in contact with Mari Margel again. We started to brainstorm ideas, starting to think about what this resolution could look like, what it should look like, and just all kinds of things. So we started to draft some of the language in there. A lot of that language from that resolution spoke directly from our clan system, from our way of life here, our way of understanding, and we started to put that together. I think building relationships with our legislators was one of the best things that I did, because I just was able to have a really serious one-on-one conversation with them, and I was giving them as much information as I possibly could so they would be able to, get all the information and be educated with all the information. So we started to do that. I think January of this year, we did present that resolution there with the help of our legal department here on the reservation, and also with backing from our legislator and our chairman. It was passed. The resolution number is 1952. I was in a plane when it passed. I wasn't even at the meeting because I was at a different place. But I actually got the message on my phone in the plane, and it was a beautiful moment. I thought, how all that time, that you spend in a car and all the time that you spend on the road away from your family, fighting a fight. Now all of a sudden you do something very beautiful and in my opinion, very proactive. So we did that, and we also had thought about how we could take this on a much bigger scale. So this is like, for us and for me, really, it's just step one. Step two would be to make this actually, a law and even a constitutional amendment here within our tribe. But I work in a statewide network of organizations, and actually a national network as well. So the idea is that we wanted to present this to all the counties in Wisconsin to get all of them to pass something very similar to what the tribe passed, of recognizing the Menominee River as having rights of nature. And then we wanted to approach the state government and get them to pass something that would recognize the rights of nature. So as a resolution to begin with, but eventually we wanted to push it into law. So that was basically how we got started, and some of the things that, drove us and drove me to just keep going and staying active. The birthplace of our reservation, that beautiful Menominee River, it actually creates the natural boundary between Wisconsin and Upper Michigan, and it flows into the Great Lakes. We're only, I would say, about maybe 40 miles as the crow flies from that mouth of that Menominee River on our current reservation. So we're not too far away. We're in our original homeland. We've done a lot of work along the river, and unfortunately we're still in that battle with that sulfide mine. Hopefully we're going to be successful in that fight. But the other thing I wanted to add to this was, as we were working on rights of nature and doing many things, I was at a treaty signing in South Dakota, and I met a lady there that was talking about the 7 generations rights. And basically it was the same, almost the same thing as rights of nature, but for our future generations. And I thought, man, like if I wouldn't have already done the resolution and had it passed already, I would have definitely added the 7 generations aspect to it. But I think, in this next coming year here, after all the elections are settled, and hopefully we have a little bit of time, that I wanted to pick that back up again and see if we can add in that 7 generations, or how we go about that. So that was the tale here of how we here at Menominee started that process, and why we did it, and kind of where we currently are now.
Great. Thank you for that, Guy. And if folks have questions, you can type them in the chat, and we'll try to answer them in the time that we have remaining. And I have a couple of frequently asked questions here that I'll ask Guy about. But if folks have questions, just type them into the chat, and we'll try to get them. Guy, can you speak about some of the challenges or pushback, if any, that you got when you brought forward the resolution? A lot of the communities we work with there's always kind of a backlash about why are we doing this, or isn't this crazy? It's kind of on the lunatic fringe kind of thing. Did you get any of that from tribal members when you began the introduction process?
Yeah, I think there wasn't so much about any of the tribal members. Like I said earlier, it was pretty much a no-brainer for all of us to recognize rights of nature. But where the pushback came was our lumber mill and other businesses on the reservation, and even departments within the tribe, because now they're going to have to be held to a standard that they weren't previously, and a lot of that came back. But I think that the way it was drafted and the languages that was used really reflected our values and morals as a tribe, so that really helped to ease that pushback. But there was a little, yeah.
And Guy, are there things happening outside the reservation, outside the boundaries, that you guys are concerned about that you might try to use something like this for?
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of just said a little earlier about this being just one step in many steps, and we wanted to take a larger approach to be able to get the whole state of Wisconsin to pass a resolution recognizing rights of nature, all the counties individually, but then something big with the state, and definitely wanting them to make it law as well. And I think as we do our ground game and work with all these affiliates, hopefully that something like that can come to reality.
And one of the questions that we've gotten from tribal members across the U.S. as they move these kinds of laws is kind of this disjointed or kind of weirdness between of using the word rights. So rights themselves are a Western construct about how government is established, and rights are generally enforced against the government or against actors that are violating those rights. From the tribal perspective, rights are kind of a foreign concept. Did you run into some of that pushback at all about folks saying, well, it's kind of a colonizing thing, this rights concept, because it's part of government, which is this Western system of law, which is kind of superimposed on us?
I didn't encounter too much of that. Here on our reservation, we have about 4 first-generation speakers left on our reservation. We do have some second-generation learners, but predominantly people speak English. But there is a strong language revitalization going on now, and those things are happening. But I think we're at a point that they're really we understand that, on paper it needs to say this, but in our, there's a word in our language, matno would be a way to describe that. But that talks more about, there's no real literal translation, but it's about the whole wellness of it, or the whole being of it, that it's good, and healthy and strong, and it describes all that in that word.
Great. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the rights of nature concept as a tribal sovereignty concept, and also to talk for a couple minutes about the recognition that rights of nature has gotten over the past 20 years. 25 years ago, when we talked about rights of ecosystems, you got laughed off the stage. In fact, I remember doing a tour of law schools 20 some years ago, and environmental law professors would get up and walk out because there's this whole environmental industry, environmental law industry kind of that has contributed and owns this regulatory system with experts and everything else. And so the good news is that there's been a bunch of law schools now, University of Florida at Gainesville, the Levin College of Law there, Tulane Law School, Vermont Law School have held these conferences or symposia about the rights of nature. And many of the leading Western environmental law professors, some who even wrote the Federal Clean Water Act, have now jumped on the bandwagon of saying we need rights of nature as an expansion thing. And I guess the pushback for us has been in the U.S. that state legislatures have begun to adopt laws banning municipalities or localities from passing these rights of nature laws, which is, I think, kind of funny because sometimes on our side we say, well, that's on the fringe and may not be effective and all those things. But on the other side, with the corporations and the industries, they're saying we got to stop this stuff using whatever we can. So they understand the efficiency and effectiveness of it. We don't sometimes in our own corners. But in Florida and Ohio, the state legislatures have now passed laws that preempt or attempt to prohibit cities, towns, counties from adopting anything that would recognize rights of ecosystems in those municipalities. And so we've been helping the Florida folks to file a lawsuit against the state to say you can't, that it's beyond your authority as a state to stop cities and towns from adopting more stringent environmental standards than the state has in place or the federal government has in place. And so I think in reality, people ask us, well, isn't it a better, more attractive place to do this work in tribes? Because tribes have a degree of greater sovereignty than municipal governments, not to get in the weeds about the law that surround these two, because they're very complex, as you know, as you know. So the fact is that, yes, I think there's a greater degree of sovereignty at the tribal level to adopt these kinds of laws rather than in the municipalities. So we have a couple questions. Guy, the first one is for you from Gail. She asks, is the sulfide mining company or Wisconsin DNR taking the Menominee resolution seriously in the consideration of the mine? I'm not sure which mine she means. Do you know? Guy?
Yeah, the one I was referring to called the Back 40 mine. Well, at this point, the mine is being proposed on the Michigan side of the Menominee River. But, what we've always said, even early in the beginning, was that, at the time when this began, Governor Walker was our governor. He just kind of basically said that, well, let Michigan figure it out, and we agree with everything they say. But that really left no recourse for anybody on the Wisconsin side that lived along the river, that if their water were to get polluted when this mine, or if this mine ever got built. So when we switched administrations to the current governor, we had a little bit more of an open door, had some conversations about it. He's come out, against it. We really started to ramp things up, but then March came and the coronavirus came and has really just halted just everything. And I think a lot of us are trying to still figure out how to be effective and like what we can even do and what we can't do. And it's a lot more difficult to be in community when you can't be in community, and also to lobby and do those things when you can't even go there. So it also gives us opportunity to strategize and to think about the bigger picture and how we move this initiative and move this idea forward. And that's always a good thing too, to have more time.
And Guy, can you talk a little bit about the mine, which mine it is, and what kind of impacts it's going to have?
Yeah, it's a sulfide mine, a gold and zinc mine located 150 feet off the Menominee River. That's a half a football field. The mine and hole itself that they're going to dig is a half a mile wide and 750 feet deep, which is about 2.5 Statue of Liberty standing on top of itself. The actual area that the mine is, the whole area, there's 3 known burial mound groups of ours that are right next to the mine. We've been very adamant about those, and they're still there. They've been studied, by University of Michigan, back in the 70s and 60s. So there's quite a bit of documentation about it. One of the funny things is that when very first public hearing we went to, I had gotten up and I was talking about Menominee this and Menominee that, and I had said, we're in Menominee County, and like it's called the Menominee River, and there's the Menominee tribe that's no more than like 40 miles away, because nobody even talked to us or asked us about anything. And one of the ladies was like, "Oh, I never even knew there was a Menominee tribe." And I was like, "Everything around here is named Menominee. Where did that name come from?" But we got them tied up in legal court right now. There's no work being done. They're still trying to figure their end out, but we're sticking tough right now.
So, Guy, do you know of any other work in Wisconsin, folks that might be interested or are moving towards adoption of this kind of framework?
I do. I have been talking with some legislators up in Bad River, up by Ashland, Wisconsin, a part of the Bad River tribe, who are currently fighting Line 5 right now. And they have a tremendous area of wild rice. And I know that White Earth in Minnesota has recognized the rights of Menomin, or Menoma in our language, of wild rice. And we're kicking that idea around as we speak, how that could potentially happen. There's other tribes too that are very much interested in that.
Great. So we have two other questions. One from Elia. She asks, would ordinances drafted from the Code of Federal Regulations be required to post in the Federal Register? Answer is no, but there's a caveat to that. So tribal laws passed, like by the Business Committee, Business Council of the White Earth Nation, that goes through just an internal adoption process. What Guy's been talking about goes through an internal tribal adoption process. The only caveat is that most tribes are operating under a rule that the U.S. government has to approve tribal constitutional changes. There's been some movement over the past years to throw off the Department of Interior from having the ability or authority to approve or disapprove tribal constitutional changes. I think that's very healthy because the tribe itself, of course, should be able to determine what is in their own constitution. But the caveat is you still have that kind of sticking out there in terms of Secretary of Interior having to approve some of those constitutional provision changes. Guy, have you run up into any of that conversation?
Yeah, we actually last year did a campaign to remove some of that language in our Constitution and giving the Menominee tribe the full authority. And we actually fell short, but I don't think it was because of because of the support of the community. I just think that we didn't get out far enough ahead of it to be able to educate some of our people of what we're actually talking about, because unfortunately, our tribe back in the 60s was terminated by the federal government. We were the first tribe to be terminated. And I know the Klamath tribe was the second. So we fought to get restoration, and we got it back in the 70s. So, a lot of those people are still around and still here. And it was a very tumultuous time in our history, and there's still a lot of fear around trying to change the Constitution or anything like that, because we obviously don't want that to happen again. Absolutely.
And you put yourself at risk of losing perhaps grants and other federal monies kind of thing also, I would imagine. So there's also that. So one final question, and I think we'll wrap it up unless folks have others. So we have a question from Rick. I think that's Rick Eichstadt, who lives around the corner from me in Spokane, Washington. But he asks, have any of the tribal ordinances been successful to stop a pollution source? The answer is they haven't really been tried at this point. So we're kind of at the beginning. But a conversation we have been having with the White Earth Nation was about the Enbridge line, the oil pipeline that's running north of the White Earth Reservation, that Menomin, wild rice on the reservation, now has rights. And part of those rights are climate rights. So if the oil pipeline is going to haul oil that's going to exacerbate climate change, that to us violates the rights of Menomin, wild rice, and creates a kind of enforcement situation where something like the wild rice ordinance could be used to try to stop the pipeline, for example. And then just one last thing, which is with the Western municipalities that we work with, the cities and towns, we had a situation this past year where a state agency revoked a permit on the basis of the rights of nature law that had been passed in that particular municipality. So it's again, voluntary recognition by the state agency that the law existed, but they actually revoked a permit for a frac wastewater injection well because of that rights of nature law. So I think we're coming to an end on the workshop. Guy, just wanted to thank you for being here and telling your story and for all the work that you've done. And I think that wraps it up for us.
Ganesh Cheesh, Thomas, and Ganesh Cheesh, Guy, for coming and being with us today. I know that we have some chat and some responses that this information was helpful and people are looking forward to using it.